everyone. Welcome to the Felicity, Optimist versus Cynic podcast with us, your hosts, Melissa and Fish. This is a Felicity rewatch podcast. We'll watch an episode each week and join you here to talk about it. Just a quick reminder before we get into it, though, this is not a spoiler-free podcast. We're going to try to only keep it to conversation about what we saw in season 1, episode 2, but it's possible we'll bring up some things that happened in the future of Felicity episodes. So just know that if you haven't seen all of Felicity, it could happen. We'll try to alert you when it does, but beware. So having said all that, I am Melissa, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Fish. Fish, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. I am ready to start talking about The Last Stand.
Yeah, this was a fun one. So The Last Stand aired October 6th, 1998. It was written by J.J. Abrams and directed by Matt Reeves. They made a great team. The description on this one is, when Felicity learns a mail called the admissions office requesting a copy of her application essay, she assumes it was Ben, the subject of said essay, and sends him a copy. Meanwhile, Felicity's parents pop up in New York again. There was a lot to this episode, Fish. So where do you want to start?
For me, The Last Stand is a great title, but it's a bit simplistic for this episode. It is the last stand where Felicity says, "I'm staying in New York," to her parents, and she makes a decision. But what I really took away from the episode was how people are interacting with each other when they are choosing to tell the truth and when they are choosing to lie about things. They're doing it for a variety of reasons. We pan in on Felicity as she's speaking, saying that she is over Ben, and then we see Julie next to her, and Felicity says, "And Julie's over Ben, so everything is great," and this is not true, as the two are staring longingly at this man. We also get to see some of the consequences of the truth that happened in episode 1, the pilot. Felicity is pretty much word vomiting over everyone. We get to see her speak with Noel and see the consequences of Noel telling her that he had feelings for her. It's now awkward. And that is one of the reasons that I see a lot of characters not really telling the full truth in this episode, just to make social interaction easier. But there is a fair amount of lying to oneself as well. I love that Felicity says, when she's with Noel, this statement that you can only say when you were young, "You can never be ashamed of the truth," which of course we find is not even true throughout the episode as Felicity runs down her letter that she has sent to Ben. There is a wonderful scene and series of scenes with her parents where lying versus truth really comes into play. I've been to college, and none of our floors were shampooed with something that smelled like beer, unless it was beer. And so there's just lie after lie that she's telling her parents in the dorm as they're looking around and getting a first impression. And in the same vein, as they're meeting with the counselor, Felicity's parents are not being completely forthcoming. Her father saying, "We didn't give you an ultimatum," when they completely gave her an ultimatum. But what I find special about this episode is you begin to see, yes, the consequences of telling a certain type of unconsidered truth. And then you see all of these sort of series of lies. But there's an evolution of the episode to people getting to know each other better by actually sharing things that are important about themselves. So before I continue and talk a little bit more about that, I wanted to kind of get your sense of maybe some of those scenes with her parents and with Noel and Julie and others.
Yeah, there was a lot of good stuff that you said there. And I didn't in my head think of this as truth versus lie, but I see exactly how you got there. And I think that's a really good way to classify all of these scenes. For me, I thought of this a lot as people hiding their feelings, both from other people and from themselves. I saw that with the parents and with all the friends that were tracking, but I put those things in two different buckets because I guess I think that the stuff with the friends is a little bit more simple in some ways than the stuff with the friends. And for me, that idea of I'm hiding my feelings, for me, I guess the breakdown was more about who's hiding it from the other person and who's hiding it from themselves and, by proxy, the other person. And I think there was a lot of complexity around that in this episode. So that's what initially jumped out for me. I mean, we see of the friends, the person who sort of confronts things the most is Ben with Julie. But even there, I think that they're really sort of dancing on the edges of how they all really feel. So when I think about what this episode was in the big picture, it feels like there's eventually going to be an explosion because everybody's holding so much in from themselves and from other people. And whether we see that explosion happen all in one episode later on, or whether we see it happen sort of piece by piece with each of these different elements being unraveled, I think it has to happen because there's a real buildup that's happening in the last stand that we can track going forward.
I can see that on the side with the friends, and I completely agree that people are not being forthcoming with their own feelings because when they have been, then they're getting themselves into trouble. I found that Ben was purposefully holding back from Julie. He's not declaring his love for her, but there's sort of a gentle pursuit that he's starting. She's pretty upfront with the fact that she is avoiding him, and it's not because of him, and it's not because of Felicity. And again, she's not sharing everything, but he still asks to hear her play guitar. And that is, as I said, what I see as this kind of gentle pursuit of her, showing that he's still interested without overpowering her. Something that we absolutely do not get from Noel. He is the complete opposite of Noel in this episode. So I'll come back to more about her parents because I do agree there's a lot more about them, and what I saw is kind of the evolution towards a better truth. But if we can just take a minute to talk about Noel, because first of all, he got a lot cuter. Between the pilot and here, they clearly wanted to make him more of a viable love interest. Mm-hmm. And so he got a lot cuter and a whole lot creepier.
Oh. Well, my first note about Noel is look at the size of that man's computer. That's what those computers were like then. That's just a side note though, because okay, you saw him as creepier. Well, yeah, there were a lot of things in the pilot that I was like not sure about with Noel, but I would say for me, the driving force for Noel in this episode is his desperate need to be liked by Felicity's parents. It was clear. It was all over his face. He was working so hard to put on a good front, and he was really failing most of the time, but he tried so hard. And I think that is the kind of thing that you only expect somebody to do if you're in a relationship. So it's a big jump for this guy who's still, in crush phase to be trying to impress her parents. But that's what we got from Noel in this episode.
Yeah, he is clearly overstepping. He is her RA, so that's already weird. And then she's talking to him about how he had feelings for her, and he says, "Oh, don't worry, it was just a power trip." Not feeling great about that. And then there's this, I feel, really manipulative moment where he is trying to get her parents to come because he wants to meet them. It is not at all clear to me that his motives are genuine in getting them to understand her and for it not to be a mystery the way that he says, for the reasons that he says they should be coming. So you've got him dealing with this let's say, conflict between two other students, where one is dreaming and talking about stabbing the other roommate, which we can laugh about now, and I guess we could have laughed about in the 90s. With all of the violence that goes on in schools, I don't know that this ages as well.
Yeah.
So actually having one of them come in with a knife and having him talk to these two people, his priorities become very clear because he is trying to find out if Lewis is going to stab his roommate.
Mm-hmm.
And as he starts to ask this, Felicity comes along and he just drops that. So he's completely manipulated the situation. He is ignoring potential violence that is under his authority. And he says what I think is a very creepy line, not as creepy as the blood bags, don't get me wrong, but can't wait to meet the people that made you. And you are two people like desperately in love with each other, staring into each other's eyes, and you're gonna get married, and you're caught up in that. I could see someone saying that. Your RA, who says he has a power trip going on and is like trying to get people not to stab each other, this is not an appropriate statement.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, so many things to talk about there. First of all, one of the things that I love about this show is that they really do show you. There are a lot of times when they have these minor scenes with people you don't really know in the dorm. And I love that because that is actually kind of what dorm life feels like. You've got your core group, and then there are the people that are also living there that you see and you have these moments with. And so the fact that they carve time into the show to give you these little moments, I think is fantastic. This particular one, I didn't know whether to laugh or not laugh because it was comedic at the time. And the comedic timing of the people playing these parts, Larry and Lewis, it was spot on. But like you said, the subject matter didn't age well. We've seen more violence in schools, and it's been such a consistent through line in the news over the years. So it's hard to find the comedy of that funny the way you might have when you saw this back in 1998 or early 2000s. But I do love that they make time in the show for moments like this. And we'll certainly see a lot more of that, especially freshman year. And I appreciate it. The stuff that you were saying with Noel, when he talks about the power trip, I actually saw that as a lie. He was just trying to soften the moment. He was trying to joke his way or fake his way through. I mean, she had called him out and what she said was honest and true. And he was trying to back out of it. And so he said that. And so for me, it played comedic, not creepy. But I definitely see why you would have taken it that way. I don't think he meant it literally. I think he really was feeling the way she described, and he was trying to back his way out of the situation as much as he could. I think it's worth pointing out that in our welcome episode, Fish, you came down on his side and you were like, I was into Noel. So listen, folks, if you are listening to this and you're in that Ben versus Noel conflict and you're on the Noel side, we might eventually swing back around to Noel. Just didn't happen up top here. Yeah, I think Fish is having some moments watching this character back.
It's true. However, I will also say that in the last episode, I said that I enjoy living in the creepy and awkward. So, he fits. He fits right into my sweet spot there. I didn't mean that as it sounded.
Well, you did tell us that you wanted it to be Fish and Noel, not Felicity and Noel. So I guess this is all lining up for me here in what you're describing. But there were so many things in this episode that I look at. Some of the smaller things. First of all, I love that Mrs. Jessup is the agent of chaos. She tells Felicity, you've got an admirer. Hey, somebody was asking about your college admissions essay, and she sends the whole world into disarray. And she doesn't even have a speaking role. She just kind of stands over Felicity, and we get an episode out of it. I mean, that's a lot of power for Mrs. Jessup.
She is, and she sets everything in motion. This starts to come back to, as I saw, kind of the role of truth versus lying with her parents. As she is having this meeting with the guidance counselor, first, I just want to say Felicity was paying for this herself. There is actually no reason that the school should be intervening or mediating with her parents. She is over 18. She's an adult. They have nothing to do with her financial aid. So I was a little taken aback that the school would allow this. So let's just assume that this is for some reason okay and not potentially illegal. So we get into this meeting where she starts talking to her mom and her dad about why she came. And again, she just decides without considering what might happen to tell them that she came out there for Ben. And she sees the immediate consequences with her parents both freaking out and asking, how is this possible? And it was nice that the counselor stepped in and said, this isn't the reason that she's staying, starts to bring, the conversation back on track. Then Felicity, she talks about these Tuesdays that she spent with her mother. It is clear that they had a very close relationship before she went away to college. And her mother was very invested in it, and she was as invested in it as, a child growing up can be. And she makes this almost unfortunate metaphor, or she's trying to explain, how she feels stepping out on her own. And she says, I'm eating a hamburger. I realize it's a Tuesday. Basically saying, I'm out on my own eating on a Tuesday. I'm no longer at home. And you see the camera pan over to her mother's face. And I had originally written down that I saw both that she was proud and she was hurt. But then in her mom's immediate reaction, I crossed off the word proud, which is interesting because later she does say she was proud. So I then went back and wrote proud again towards the end of the episode. So, she's now stuck in this moment where her mother is very hurt and her father is angry. And how are we going to get from that to the end of the episode where I actually think they all share something of themselves and they get back to a better spot? And we can talk more about that, but I want to see what your initial reactions were.
I had a lot of initial reactions. And every scene with the parents was very complex to me and in different ways. And I think that they did quite a job to, in one episode, show an arc that I think in real life might not have taken the equivalent of one episode to do. I guess the first thing that I want to say, because it's interesting that you mentioned that the parents probably shouldn't have been able to have this meeting with her counselor, given that they weren't actually stakeholders in this situation. So it's interesting that you say that. I think on another side of looking at this, I had this experience when I was in college, when I can't remember, it was my junior or senior year maybe, and I had to get back early from winter break. A lot of athletes did. What used to happen is, the winter athletes, you were still in season, you were probably competing. And so they needed to get you back to school right after the holidays so that you didn't have too long a break and that you could get right back down to it. But what they did was they didn't have you go back to your dorm. They opened up one dorm for a couple of weeks and all of the athletes just stayed in it. So you were back at school, but you were not in your room. You didn't have any of your stuff. It was somebody else's room. So there was this one year where I had to go back, and it was agreed that a teammate of mine would drive me. And, usually it was my parents that would drive me back to school. So this was unusual. And I could tell that they were really worried about me getting to school safely, though that worry was just in their head. There was no real reason to be worried. So we drove back to school. Everything was fine. We were trying to get settled into somebody else's room. This was before cell phones, or at least before I had a cell phone. So the only time that I could potentially call my parents was when I got to the gym to go to practice, which was later that day when I arrived. And by the time I arrived in the gym, my coach told me, "Oh, your parents called. They're wondering if you're okay." I was like, "Okay, I'll call them." And then within 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, two other administrators, one of whom I never met, were like, "Is Melissa here? Her parents called and they're trying to figure out if she's okay." And now it went from being like, I'll call them, to I was actually felt really violated because I had no phone to call them until I got to the gym. And I felt like it had become a federal case. So now, like, all of these people were being involved, administrators, people who worked at the school, they were getting into my business, and I didn't want that. And I was about to call them. And so the feeling that I had when that happened to me is sort of the feeling that I had when I saw that Felicity's parents were sitting in her counselor's office. It's a level of intrusion, almost like they inserted themselves physically into a situation that didn't really require that level of involvement. If they had been able to have a conversation with her, which how much were they really trying to do that? It might have been a different scenario, but you can see her initial reaction is like, like she feels the ambush of it. And so that puts the whole conversation on a very strange footing. And I think they do a good job in the episode of getting them to a place where they can have conversations. And I think the counselor helps bring the conversation back on track when it's needed. But I do think there was a lot of stuff in that conversation that really was so complicated. Like, the dad saying, "We never insisted," were we being too controlling? And then Felicity saying, no, you weren't. The whole bit about eating the burger and her mom's reaction and her mom feeling so hurt right away. And I think, her parents in this moment are not able to appreciate that she's made a decision and she's doing it. She's doing her decision and she's taking it on herself. And as much as you can feel hurt, at some point, you also need to let go if this relationship is going to go to a positive place. So one of the things that really came up for me as a theme in this episode is when Julie labels all this as rejection later. That idea that there's this feeling of rejection that her parents have, and they have to cope with that before they can treat Felicity as an adult. That really rang true for me looking at this first scene where you can unpack all that conversation. I don't know. There was a lot to me in this first couple of interactions that they had, and arguably they get to a different place towards the end of the episode. But there's a lot to that too. I think there's so many things that Felicity's mom says to her that Felicity only 1/3 hears all the stuff that her mom is communicating to her. So I don't know. I'm going to throw this one back over to you because I could talk forever about this. But what do you think about how all that unfolded?
Yeah, I was going to come back to that same moment with Julie. Only I think I labeled it a little differently. I saw this as a moment, again, of Julie's empathy. She is putting herself in the place of Felicity's parents and explaining to Felicity, who I still think is in that self-centered mode, this is what is happening emotionally with your parents. And her mother does say some really horrible things. And it's hard to kind of get over that, but Felicity does. And so I think from this combination of having empathy for the other person, realizing your parents are flawed, and taking what I think is almost a superhuman amount of reflection and, as I said, empathy to deal with them, it's one of those inconsistencies that I see between her being so young and then having these moments of, emotional maturity. She has this dinner with her father where her mother doesn't even show up. And her father then says, "I'm willing to pay for you to go to school." And what he does in that moment is he makes it all about himself. He says, this is really important to me, that I have done all this work and gotten to a certain point in my life, and it's important that I am paying for you to go to school. And Felicity accepts that, which, I mean, I probably would have flipped the table. So, my reaction is, okay, I mean, this is her really feeling and understanding where her father is coming from and accepting it and saying thank you, which is just, again, this superhuman amount of control that she has over her emotions. And similarly, when her mother comes back, she has this, what I think is actually a really nice moment. I think her mother first deals with this absolutely terribly and then actually does a good job, because she sits down with Felicity and explains where she's coming from. She says, I had this very strong reaction because of my past. And she says, these Tuesdays that we had with each other, I lived for them, which is a lot of pressure to put on a kid. And she recognizes that it was too much and she does need to let go. And then they have this nice, cute shared moment where her mother and her, in a similar fashion to her and Julie, just kind of stare at Ben as he walks away after Felicity introduces him as the guy that she came to college for, and her mother understands that. So, it's always nice to stare at a good-looking butt. So, mother-daughter moments, also kind of creepy. But at the end of the episode, she is hugging her parents. They've accepted that she's staying there. I fully agree. This is a whole lot of progress in a very short amount of time. And I do feel a disconnect on whether or not this would really happen.
So we have slightly different interpretations on the Felicity maturity piece of it, because I think what you were seeing as her empathy and maturity was her not really processing what her parents were doing or saying. I think on the surface of this episode, her parents are now saying, we accept your decision. I'm not sure that's real all the way deep down for them yet. So like you said, her dad is saying, all right, I lost this battle. Like, you're staying here. I get that. I will pay room and board. I noted how he was saying, had you been at Stanford, room and board wouldn't have been an issue. So there was an assumption that she would have lived at home and that she would have continued to be a presence in their home life. And, he's going to take on that expense for her now. And he says it, but he looks really bothered. He doesn't look like he's made peace with it. He looks like he's doing it though. And, she says, thank you. And I don't know if she says it because she's thinking, okay, they're backing down. I can live my life now. That may not be the last she hears on this topic. I think, this is probably not the end of the conversation. It's probably the end of this part of the conversation. And now that he's paying for something, there is a string attached. Like, he now is in a position where he can always say, but I'm paying your room and board. So he may feel now that he can be part of her decisions. She doesn't really know where this is going to go. And she's not really asking. She's just, this part of the conversation seems to be closed. With her mom, I felt even more that she was not prepared to process all the stuff that her mom was telling her. Because I think her mom was having some very major adult revelations in that moment, and she was revealing them to Felicity, and they were so big. I'm just looking back at some of the things that she said, and she told Felicity, I met your father very young. I had you at 20. She says, all those visions I had for my life, all the dreams you think might possibly materialize, they all started disappearing one by one. She says it's not because of Felicity, but at the end of the day, she was pregnant and she made decisions with that in mind. And that's a heavy load to put on your daughter. And Felicity really didn't address it, didn't acknowledge it. And it wasn't the battle of the moment. She was just, to me, it was like she was hurt that her mother was hurt by hearing her truth. she didn't realize her mother could be hurt by hearing her truth. She's trying to figure out how to patch things up with her mom. And in the process, her mom is telling her stuff that is so deeply heavy that she probably should unpack and just does not have the wherewithal to do it right now. And I don't even know that she's heard it yet, the way that her mom said it. So yeah, to me, there was a lot in those scenes. And there's a lot of fodder that can be explored for future episodes if they decide to go that way. And we'll just have to see if Felicity starts to hear this stuff.
I can see that. It's not, I guess, the way that I saw it this time, but it's what you said. We'll have to see what happens in the future episodes, because I did feel that moment with her mother. It seemed genuine.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was genuine. I think the mom was having some really important discoveries, and what she was saying was genuine. It was just very loaded. And
it was very loaded. And similarly, I absolutely agree with what you said about strings being attached with money. That is something that, I've dealt with in my own life. And, the reason that I would probably have flipped the table, making sure that I have the money to support myself is very important, because when you're depending on someone else, if you don't have the same understanding of the power dynamic of what your decisions mean, then it can become highly explosive. So if her father does then jet in again at another point in time and says, well, now you have to be pre-med because that's what I said, that could definitely end up being an issue again. And I do hope, for her sake, that she kept that whole financial aid process and packages and things like that, because she may need it again. But I do still feel like she did show emotional maturity, I guess, in her passivity. And maybe it is not processing, and maybe it's falling back on how she was before. But I guess just coming to it from my perspective, where I would have been pissed and hurt, her kind of acceptance of these things, she doesn't look angry and hurt. She does look kind of bewildered at first. And then she seems to be kind and hugging them and trying to get back to some sort of good relationship, which I found very interesting, juxtaposed with this scene that she has with Julie where she's alone in the cafeteria. And then Julie comes in and she, talks about her parents feeling rejected. And then the two of them look at each other and say, I feel so grown up now, which just kind of put this smile on my face, because they're starting to, it's a process. They're not grown up, as we've seen throughout the episode with Felicity impulsively sending her essay to Ben. But it at least gave me a moment to try to see things from her parents' side. I was trying to put myself in their shoes as they're walking into Felicity's dorm, which if they went to college, they should know it's gonna smell like beer. It just is. They walk into what is actually a very beautiful room, but yes, she has an interesting roommate. She has an interesting RA. There's a guy with a knife. Some of these things don't seem great. They had just heard before that the reason she came was over a guy. And then we hear from Julie that the reason she came was because she had found her birth mother's name. So two women who had initially decided to come to New York for reasons that were not related to their education or, at least their financial future. So it's very much the beginning of a process of growing up. And I thought that it was very interesting that Felicity talks to the counselor about feeling guilty for growing up. I definitely would not say that has been my experience. I was ready to get out. But just because we're on the subject of growing up, I did want to give an award. I have an award this time. And I think, again, this may change. I may need to re-award it later. But we have to remember this is 1998, before millennial bashing started. And Felicity has this wonderful line at the beginning of the episode saying, "Everyone's a snowflake." So I am awarding that the most millennial quote for this episode, not in any negative way. I am not going to wade into the generations before versus generations to come, but I definitely think it was something early on that reflected that individuality that we see of the millennial generation.
Yeah. A few different things I want to say about what you were just saying. First of all, the scene between Julie and Felicity, obviously another very heavy scene. And I wanted to make a general note about the show because I have discovered, so I had an opportunity recently to also do a rewatch with somebody who's new to Felicity on a different platform. So Fish and I are watching basically what was the DVDs. I went back and watched on like Amazon and ABC.com a couple of episodes of somebody else, and I realized the music is completely different. And so I think that there was the music that was underpinning the show when it originally aired on the WB. I think that when they went to, what was it, when they had the reruns airing, I think that might be the same music that ended up on the DVDs. And I suspect that the music that's now on streaming platforms is yet another soundtrack. And there's some overlap, but some of the stuff that we're highlighting as being really important musical choices may or may not be what you're hearing. And I'm not sure how that changes things. So the scene with Julie and Felicity, I was just looking it up on what we were watching. It was a wonderful song called Displaced by Azure Ray, but the original airing had a Sarah McLachlan song. And Sarah McLachlan was very much the vibe of this show for as long as it ran. So there was definitely a sort of like 90s feminine, like that sort of sound. There was also a lot of indie rock. So I just wanted to say, if we ever make comments about sound, I think it's worth noting that not everybody is going to have the same experience with the music that you're hearing on the show. But the music that we're hearing really feels like it resembles what the show was. So I wanted to say that about that scene because I felt like the songs that they had originally really had the right vibe for a scene as heavy as what you see with Julie and Felicity. Julie is going to be really good at doing heavy scenes in this show. They're going to probably give her some more of those along the way, and she's just really good at it. But on contrasting that, there was so much comedy in this episode. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the heavy stuff because there was a lot of it in this episode, but there was so many funny moments. The comedy of errors that happened when Felicity's parents show up at the dorm, which, by the way, that is never a good place to, like, that is not the place you bring the parents to feel comfortable. People are living their lives. You cannot control your dorm mates. Some may be doing fine things, some may not. You have no control over it. So for future people thinking about like, this could be the way to get everybody comfortable, that's probably not it. But, one after another, these things are happening. And it's just, Noel has his transgression and, they see Meghan and Larry and the knife and the fire alarm goes off. And I also have an award here. Most facial expressions in 20 seconds. I'm going to give that to Noel after he says, "Hey, when did the overbearing parents get here?" The amount of stuff that happened on his face in almost no time at all was hilarious to me. And just that whole thing, it was really meant to play comedically as just the comedy of errors that it was. That there's really sort of tragic consequences to what's happening, but it still is just like, what more could they possibly pile on to this? And then, they give us plenty of time to look at Meghan's side of the room. Again, Meghan, we've seen maybe 20, 30 seconds of actual screen time for Meghan, and the impact she has made has been massive. Fish and I stopped down on what was on her side of the room just to really marvel at the way the set designers had established her room. Fish, what are some of the things that we found on Meghan's side of the room?
Well, I mean, we did have an argument over whether there were one or multiple skulls. And, I personally very much enjoyed what I saw as sateen, dark purple sheets. I will say in college, did have an acquaintance, male acquaintance with black satin sheets on his bed. Remember visiting that. Don't remember his name, but definitely remember the bed. So that was a choice. That was a definite choice. Yeah, everything about that room, that side of the room to me reads Meghan, reads, perfectly her. I was a little thrown off by the normal purse. That I think was like the out of place thing over there.
Yeah. And I picked up some other things. So in her closet, there's the top right of the closet, there's a giant mask. It's like a white face with just red feathers or whatever, a boa all over it. I don't even know how to describe the mask. It was oversized. I don't know what events she went to that warranted that particular mask, but it was amazing. And then I also enjoyed that kind of right over Felicity's head in one of the shots is a big poster for an event called Funeral Bration. I don't know what that event is, but it was exactly the type of thing that you would think Meghan would go to. And, they just have these little touches, and even if you don't pause your screen to pick up on all of them, you feel it in how Meghan comes across. This is a woman with a really eclectic taste.
I would say, though, I just wanted to pause for a moment because you said earlier when they first showed Noel in this episode, your thought was, wow, size of that computer. Mine was, is that a giant American flag he's got hanging on his back wall? Because why? I mean, Noel doesn't scream, ultimate patriot to me. So I was very thrown off by the giant flag that takes up his entire back wall. Just again, it's a choice.
Yeah, I guess we're going to have to see if Noel's patriotism is a thread that we should be tracking later in the show. I'm not really sure. One other thing I wanted to point out, and this was another minor character moment, but I find this guy so funny. So there was the person on staff at the mailroom that Felicity is trying to work over so she can get that letter back. I looked him up. His name is Bob Clendenin. And this is not the only time we'll see him in this show. And he's going to have more than one job at the school in this show. So anytime they needed a guy to play like a counselor or something like that, they were like, hey, Bob, come on out. We got another job for you. So I think it's so funny because he kind of reminds me of in the Gilmore Girls, there's a guy named Kurt who has just like a different job every episode. And it's not to that level, but this guy kind of does that. And he's so good up against Felicity, and she's trying to manipulate him, and he's absolutely not having it. And he really gives it back to her in that scene. So I'm looking forward to seeing other times when he will appear.
I am glad that you're talking about Bob. I feel like he was in Gilmore Girls as well as sort of a side actor. I've seen him in a couple other shows, and he always plays this awkward side character. And can we just give a shout out also to Larry, who now is of Harold and Kumar fame? It was very hard not to see that scene as funny because he is an amazing comedic actor. And I have not yet been able to see Cowboy Bebop, but I will. And it's on my list. I absolutely love him. And I love that, I get this little glimpse of him for the first time as a scared freshman with a potentially homicidal roommate. I feel he's just beginning to develop his acting chops, and I'm here for it.
He was really good in the role, I'll tell you that. So yeah, we appreciate all these side characters, all these smaller parts, and the way they fill out this show. I do want to, I was just thinking about, I am the optimist, and I know that some of the stuff I said here wasn't as optimistic. So I'd like to circle back and give you some notes from an optimist and make us all feel good for a moment. So look, I know I'm sort of wondering, is this the final stand that's really needed with the Felicity and her parents dynamic? But I will say that it really is a huge step for her parents that they're starting to let go, that they're starting to accept her as an adult, that they're making that first effort. And I want to have that hope that when you love somebody, whether they be your child or whether they be a friend or somebody else, significant other, that you can give them some amount of freedom to do what they need to do. Chances are that's going to work out better than if you prevent them from doing what they want to do. And, we're seeing them do that here. And I have to acknowledge them for that in this episode, because it's not easy. The decisions Felicity is making it's hurting them. It hurts them. They do feel, I guess, that rejection, or they do feel that she's making new choices that have nothing to do with them, and they have to come to grips with that. And they're starting to, right? And that's a big ask. It's a tall order, and they're doing it. And I think that's where you start to see, if it's going to be a loving relationship, that move has to be made, and they're starting to do it. So I do feel good about that.
That is a very nice note from our optimist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will say that normally we plan to do the what Sally said, what Sally meant segment, but that's not going to happen today because they didn't have that segment in this particular episode. We did open with Felicity talking to Sally, but we didn't close with hearing what Sally had to say. They were trying to do a lot in this episode. They just didn't have time to have a Janine Garofalo voiceover. So unfortunately, we don't get to hear the continuation of the incredibly interesting take that Fish had on what was really going on with Sally. But I do look forward to next time we get that segment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming she's in witness protection right now, and she's not set up to get those tapes out.
This is a really good point that I hadn't considered. She had a complexity of the logistics of her life based on, your viewpoint that I hadn't considered. She might not even have gotten the tape yet.
This is true. I mean, postal system, that guy, he seems to think it's important, but we all know how the postal system works.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. My goodness. Well, what we are excited to share, though, so we have another segment about listener feedback. It's called After You Listen to This Tape, You Have to Erase It. And we have been doing some digging. As you may remember, when we talked about the pilot episode, we were asking some hard-hitting questions about nightgowns and if people wear nightgowns in college or if they don't. And we have somebody who had something to say about this. So we heard from Angela, and she says, I was in college when Felicity aired, loved it, and recently rewatched. One of the things I love about the show is that, for me at least, it truly captured so many of the feelings I had in college. Your conversation about nightgowns brought up a very specific memory for me. On my first night in the dorms, I connected with a group of girls and went out with them for a bit. When we got back, my introverted self was socially exhausted, hot, no AC, and homesick. So I put on the ridiculous 1800s prairie-style nightgown my mom had given me. And then one of the girls knocked on my door to see if I wanted to watch a movie. I'll never forget the look on her face when she saw my nightgown. All of that to say, I think you're right that people didn't generally wear nightgowns in college. I should add that I have never been a nightgown person, but it rang true for me because I was wearing mine to feel closer to home. Thank you very much, Angela. I don't know if this really cements us on one side or the other of the to nightgown or not to nightgown debate. I think we need more information. And Angela makes a really compelling case where she wore a nightgown and there was a really good reason why, but she doesn't know that she was totally accepted by others for doing so. So I don't know where we land with this, Fish. What do you think?
Well, I have to say, I was thinking about this, and it didn't even occur to me to come forward in the last recording that we did and say, while I was recording this episode, I was wearing a nightgown. And you know what? I'm wearing another one today. Yes, because here's the thing. I fully understand where Angela's coming from. Nightgowns, for me, became my preferred comfort garment because it was hot. If you have to wear pants or something like that, And then it gets really hot. And yes, it's the middle of winter now, but all of the people below me have their thermostats at 80. So nightgowns are they're cooler, and yet, they're better than an oversized t-shirt in case you have company. So I'm just saying, I think I personally have come around to being a nightgown person, but, there was a certain cool factor in not wearing them in college. Although, then again, this is the time when you get to be you. So if you're a nightgown person and you're in college, I say wear it, and wear it proudly. Walk down the hall in it, because if you like it, who cares what anybody else thinks? They're great. They're cool in terms of temperature, and you're cool for not caving to peer pressure.
Well, there may be more to uncover with this topic. We appreciate Angela's feedback, and everybody else, feel free to weigh in on this. This may not be the final chapter of this story. I know that the nightgowns, that was a thing in the pilot episode, but if we need to go all season unpacking this, we will, because that's the kind of investigative journalists we are. And we're going to get to the bottom of whether people wore nightgowns in college or not. But I think we're here to accept everybody's answers. I'm certainly learning a lot in this process. And I will also point out that I am introverted as well. So I certainly know the feeling of like going out for the first part of the party and then coming back and like getting into comfortable clothes and unwinding. So I'm sure that there are other people out there who have had that experience, but I guess that would have been the time to put on a nightgown. So for those who want to share more feedback with us, or any feedback at all on this topic or others, because we talk about a lot of things, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at themelissafish@gmail.com. That's Melissa with one L, two S's, themelissafish@gmail.com. Yeah, send us your feedback or Felicity artwork if you're an artist, and any of that would be awesome. But that's where we're at with nightgowns.
Yeah, I have one final comment on really attire in general, because one of the things that I found so freeing about college is because I was on a sports team, and yes, I was pretty much wearing the clothes from the team all the time, and they were super comfortable. But I would come into class and I would see people not in nightgowns, but clearly in what they had worn the night before. Mm-hmm. So let me know your thoughts on that as well, because, I'm interested in sort of general attire. I mean, seems like Felicity and Julie and others get fully dressed to go out, and I have not had that same experience. I feel like campus attire. What are your thoughts?
That's a good question. I'd like to hear that from people too. I'm definitely not your fashion icon myself, so I'm sure I was always about comfort no matter what I did. But for people who do care about what they wear, I wonder where you weighed in, because I know college, it's often easy to roll out of bed and go to class, or I remember people getting really dolled up to go out. But yeah, what was your experience, everyone? Feel free to share it with us. And as you consider that, Fish, I think it's time to share our ratings of the episode and what we thought of it overall. We both given an award, but what did you think for the episode as a whole?
This one was a little hard for me to rate, because on the one hand, I feel like a lot of things were dealt with in a very complex manner. We had a different side of Noel, at least from my perspective. But I really I continue to like how the show is shot and the music that we hear that accompanies it. So it's hard to go below a 7, but I can't really give it more points, because I still feel that disconnect between the emotional maturity of Felicity and how old she actually is, and the other things that she does, like mailing Ben her essay. So I'm going to stick with 7 glubs for this episode.
All right. So we got 7 out of 10 glubs from Fish. I also, it's so funny. I also gave this one, I'm going to measure this one in funeral bration posters. And I gave it 7 out of 10 funeral bration posters. And my reasoning is a little different. I think what they're doing in this episode, they do so well. They really do seem to know who these characters are. And that helps me enjoy the show because I know where they're going and I don't see completely different people in these episodes. And so it tells me that they had a really good sense of where to begin these characters and they allowed them to have the growth over the series that they need to have. So I do like that. And I like the style of the show. But there are some things in this particular episode that they just didn't allow themselves time for that were really meant to be part of the show. I mean, first of all, the fact that they opened up with this, she mails Ben the essay, they did not have time to resolve that. I feel like the way Ben is just like, oh, you sent me your essay, cool. I don't really feel that was a realistic endpoint. They just didn't have more time in the show because they had dealt with so many other things. So I think that they tried to do a little too much in this episode. And so it's funny to me when I looked back at what the description was, which is mostly about the essay. And the actual person who received the essay gets glossed over at the end. So that was, to me, a pacing issue. And I really just think they had so much going on, they couldn't get to it. Also, we didn't get Sally, probably maybe for the same reason. I don't know. But that was, a device they had set up for her. And it was one that they were only able to do halfway this time. So I think because of those things, it tells me that the pacing wasn't all the way there for this particular episode. But, there was so much that I did love about it. So 7 out of 10 is still really strong for me. But yeah, that's what I thought about it overall.
Well, I think that we have covered a lot today. I feel good about this. There's a lot to look forward to in the next episode.
There will be. And actually, the next episode is called Hot Objects. I'm looking forward to that one. I remember liking that episode. And in the meantime, again, if you have anything to share with us, we would love to hear from you at themelissafish@gmail.com. If you're interested to follow us on Instagram, you can find us at Felicity Podcast. And by the way, you also, if you want to know when we're dropping these episodes, we have a newsletter where we send out a newsletter right after we drop them. So if you check out the show notes, you can find a link to that so you can sign up and never have to wonder when a new episode of our podcast has been released. But yeah, those are all the ways to reach us. And we love hearing from you and getting to know who's watching Felicity out there. So, before we wrap up, Fish, was there any last things you wanted to say about this one?
My last thing would be, for all the times that Felicity has just blurted out the truth, why couldn't, when she saw Ben and she's holding on to the envelope of the letter that she's holding, why this one time couldn't she just burp up some truth? Just be like, I sent you something, I didn't mean to, I take it back. Please give it to me. I feel like he would have just given it to her.
There you go, Fish, poking a hole in the whole episode again. I mean, that probably would have solved some problems that they weren't prepared to really deal with his reaction. I mean, somebody should have consulted you along the way.
I mean, I feel it's true.
Uh-huh. Well, on that really impactful note, I think that's it for today, folks. So until next time, Fish, don't hook up with Ben while I'm gone.
I'm a fish.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.